Hey, what up everybody? This is Stevie Bridge coming to you with another video. Today, I didn't really know it was going to be that way, but today was the 10th year anniversary of the last Nitro from WCW. Pretty much the last Nitro was the last nail in the coffin of WCW. It was the day they folded up shop. Vince McMahon was able to purchase it from Ted Turner, and the other was at Time Warner. From there they moved on, and everybody knows where it went from there. Vince bought it mostly for the library. He did try to sort of launch a WCW brand, which built up the Invasion pay-per-view, which everybody loves to dog on. Basically, everybody took a lot of shots at WCW, like saying that WCW shouldn't have closed. WCW, as a company, a year before their last Nitro, was a company that was dead and buried. There was nothing that was going to save that company. Not another Goldberg, not anything short of Stone Cold Steve Austin finding a way out of WWE, WWF at the time, and jumping ship to WCW. There was nothing in the world that was going to save WCW. It doesn't matter what you were going to do. They had the wrong people in charge running that company. Basically, everything you've ever heard about the inmates running the asylum is true. I mean, basically, they had two shows. They had Nitro, they had Thunder. They had Thunder, which was a show they debuted, which was supposed to be like their SmackDown, their second brand show that was just as strong as the first brand, until, you know, things got tough and they had to start making some cuts. They turned it into basically to what Superstars is today, because they didn't have the money to fly in people. They started running smaller shows. Then they got the idea, hey, you know what, we'll film both shows on the same day, on Mondays. So you could have both big stars like Bret Hart and Goldberg show up on Nitro and Thunder, and they can only pay them so much. That's until somebody, one of the boys, got into the ears of one of the execs, and they said, hey, you know what, this is like working 2 days, because we're working two matches on one match, 2 matches on one night. You should have to pay us for 2 matches. And you know what? WCW gave in. And so basically Thunder went back down into the crap skin after they saved it the first time. So you can't blame anybody except for the suits, the guys that are high up out of reach. You can't blame any of the bookers or anything like that, any of the boys. You know, the boys knew how to work the guys, the agents, and everybody like that, but anybody who was at Time Warner could have done anything to pull some strings to save that company, and they didn't. Secondly, the other thing I'd like to back up is the Invasion pay-per-view. Basically, everybody likes to dog on Vince for killing what would have been a huge angle that everybody was waiting for. Yes, everybody did wait for that. Yes, the Invasion ended up being, you know, the biggest star of the company was Buff Bagwell and Booker T. And everybody knows how that match in, I believe, Omaha turned out on Nitro. You know, basically anybody from WCW could have worked that match and they would have got the same response. There's no way they should have dogged out Buff Bagwell like that and fired him for that match. And even booed Booker T. I mean, those fans paid to see not Invasion, they paid to see they paid to see WWE Attitude Style Wrestling. They wanted to see Stone Cold, they want to see Rock, and you give them a main event of Buff Bagwell and Booker T. It doesn't matter how good that match is. You know, people are going to boo them. Everybody says that match is one of the worst matches in history. And I always like to stand up for Buff and say that the match really wasn't that bad. The next thing that people like to bash on about the Invasion pay-per-view, or even the whole Invasion angle, was that you didn't have the big stars. You didn't have the NWO, you didn't have Goldberg, you didn't have Scott Steiner. And those, Ric Flair even, those people came in later in the WWE. Basically, the only way you can think of it is, those people were under contract with WCW, and even though WCW closed, they were still going to get paid, unless they did what unless they did what DDP did. DDP, what he did was he was able to void his contract out. He was able to take pennies on the dollar. That way he can sign with Vince and WWE. DDP wasn't like the other guys. DDP knew that he was, you know, he was older than the other guys. He started wrestling later in his career, and if he waited that contract out, he was going to be basically too old, and Vince wasn't going to want him. Vince only wanted him right then, and that was the only time he was going to do it. And he had a love for wrestling that was that big that he did it. Guys like the NWO, guys like Ric Flair, Goldberg, they were going to wait out that contract. Basically, everybody likes to say that every member of the YWC basically works at McDonald's and lives in their mom's basement. So let's use that analogy on you. Let's say you work at McDonald's, and McDonald's gives you a 2-year contract where you're going to make however much. You're going to make $50,000 a year. Alright? And let's say McDonald's all of a sudden closes one day. And let's say Carl's Jr. calls you up and says, hey, You want to come to work, we'll give you $50,000. You can make $50,000 sitting at home for 2 years because McDonald's is going to pay you, or you can go work your ass off at Carl's Jr. and make the same amount of money. Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. If Vince was going to sign any of these guys, basically he was going to have to pay them up to double to what they were doing, because they already had the money on the back end coming from WCW they're going to have to turn down in order to come work for him. So he had to wait this out. So you're saying, well, why couldn't they just wait the 6 months to a year once they got all these guys back into the company? Like the NWO and Ric Flair, they came along basically by No Way Out 2002, they had them all. Because WCW already closed before WrestleMania 17. You can't make this angle go that long without those guys. You had to strike while the iron was hot, while people still cared about WCW. If you waited a year, 2 years, look what happened to ECW when they came back on Sci-Fi. Basically, nobody cared. Those guys were old. And WWE did the right idea by pulling the plug on that and moving in a different direction, getting rid of all the guys except for Dreamer, basically because nobody wanted to see him anymore. You know, everybody had a big heart for those guys. And TNA tried to do the same thing because they know the fans care about ECW, but basically once you see those guys and see how, you know, old they are and how they, you know, basically haven't kept in the shape that they were in the ECW days, that I'm not paying to see that. So WCW had to, WWE had to start the WCW angle, or it was just, you know, it was going to die out on its own. So I'll stand up for the Invasion angle every day. You can pop that DVD in, and it is great all the way up to the Survivor Series. And I think that what they had was good. Yes, people want more, but you know, Vince wasn't going to pay out the money for that, and you can't blame the guys for you know, holding out and waiting for the WCW contracts to end. Once they all came to WWE, they all had good careers. Wish Goldberg's would have probably lasted a little bit longer, a lot of people would say, but you know, he did what he had to do. So that's Stevie Breach, and I'm defending WCW for the best I can. Oh, on a side note, even with the booking of WCW to the end, I still watched that show. It was still good because it was wrestling that was on TV. Basically, the booking of WCW at the end made no sense at all. They wanted to book Scott Steiner like he was some big-time heel. So basically at every pay-per-view, he would take one of the big-time faces, like Kevin Nash or DDP, and they'd have the blow-up match, and at the end of the match, he would work an injury angle on these guys, so they would take him out. What was WCW thinking that they were going to do when they only had Scott Steiner and basically all of their faces were gone? All they had was Booker T, who Booker T finally was able to take the title from Steiner. They were supposed to work an angle where all of the faces came back at one time against Steiner, which really doesn't make any sense at all, because that doesn't really make any of those faces look that great if they got beat up by Scott Steiner, but yet it takes 4 of them to come in and beat up Scott Steiner one time for somebody to take the title off him. So where they're going with that, I have no idea why they're paying those guys to stay home, but I still watched until the last day. The last angle that they were running with the main event guys was that Ric Flair had his Magnificent 6 or Magnificent 7 group of guys that he had together, and everybody was bashing him. So every week somebody was getting bashed with a metal pipe and getting taken out, and they were trying to find out who this guy was that was doing it to him, whether if it was Sid or anybody like that. Then they never answered it, and that's the one question whenever I think about the last Nitro, is they always promised us on the second to last Nitro that they were going to answer that question, and still I want to know. I want to know more than who drove the white Hummer.